So many champions, so little time. John Lepak, thank you for joining me. And we're talking about the greatest fighters of all time from the city of Detroit, which means that we're obviously talking about the Kronk Gym, which you are co-owner and is it chief operating officer? Is that the current title?
Yeah, I'm not really big on titles. You know me, Joe. So I just like to say maybe director of boxing at times, a little bit of this at other times.
I like that. Director of the fight game
That's
at
it.
the Kronk Gym. The world famous Kronk Gym, the greatest boxing gym in the history of the sport, led by the greatest trainer in the history of the sport, Emanuel Stewart. May he rest in peace. But that's the topic of the day. And I want to start with the contemporary Kronk Gym. So you've got some great momentum, some news on the infrastructure front in moving the progress forward, and you signed a great young fighter that I'm sure you want to mention.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. And first of all, it's always a pleasure sitting down with somebody that Emmanuel considered a friend. So it's always nice to get back together when time allows.
Amen.
But, you know, some great momentum. Paul, our partner, and kind of the gentleman, you know, guiding the ship right now with so many of our business initiatives. We had a great meeting the other day downtown. I almost slipped up and said the location, but I think we'll be able to announce that very soon. We've got our location in this amazing historic building already picked out. We're going to go down tomorrow and measure it out, map out where the ring will be, the heavy bags. We've got John Racy coming down to look at where the colors are going and all the great pictures from our archives and a little wall of fame as well. We're preparing with some memorabilia of Emmanuel's historic career as well.
For our audience that doesn't know these people, Paul Bhatti, originally of Manchester in the UK, a great Detroiter now.
Absolutely.
Embracing his Detroit hood. And then John Racy, mayor of Wayne, Michigan, where the amateur gym is currently located as this moves forward into a new setting in Detroit.
Yes, absolutely. And we're going to continue our relationship with the Escott location that Mr. Jeff Stiers founded over in Westland. They just celebrated 10 years. It's, I believe, 2, maybe 3 years since they acquired the Escott name, Emanuel Stewart's Champions of Tomorrow. So they've got a great after-school program for kids 8 to 18. They're going to be our official nonprofit partner. But when we get back down to Detroit, you know, I'm getting back to the old school. I'm bringing a lot of the original Kronk guys I grew up with from past generations. We're going to develop a world-class amateur team, professional athletes, and work closely with PAL as well to where if kids come into our location and say boxing's not for them, well, we could send them over to PAL. They can try out, you know, baseball, football, basketball, all the other great programs that PAL has to offer as well.
Yeah, that's the Police Athletic League. And in this Escott program, the family is still very much involved. I know you and Paul keep Marie and Sylvia. This is the first family of boxing, the Stewart family.
Oh, yeah. So with Kronk's current setup, Joe, it's a great question. Sylvia is still a consultant. Mrs. Stewart, I like to call her kind of like our mom. You know, she's there for advice. And
the matriarch.
Yeah, there you go, founder emeritus. And she's able to share so many of the great stories from when her and Emanuel started out together and working with so many of the guys when they were kids, you know, Milton and Stevie and Tommy, when they were just little kids coming up playing sandlot baseball and boxing. So it's great to have that wisdom. And then we've recently just announced that Hilmer Kenty, our first world champion, is going to be our brand ambassador for Kronk. So again, keeping true to the original roots. We've had discussions with Jimmy Paul, Milton McCrory about coming back on board with the training staff as well. So again, we're trying to keep it, you know, very true to Kronk at its roots, and then also extending out the invitation once we get things a little more concrete to the generations that came past that, from, you know, your Octavio Laras, your Anthony Barnes, your Ed Williams, you know, just so many guys who can go on and on that we would all like to, you know, welcome back into the family and provide an opportunity where there is.
As we've been exploring the documentary film project that I'm so honored and proud to be helming and working with you and Paul and some of the other folks, Lindsay Fellows, and you know, we've gotten a chance to put a really nice team together of creative input here. But as I've been going through all the footage, the Hilmer Kenty clip, winning his first title, the first Kronk title, March 2nd, 1980, with Howard Cosell behind the mic. The furious onslaught of punches that led to the TKO, the referee stepping in, listening to it. I defy you to be a Detroiter that has any interest in boxing and not get goosebumps when you hear Cosell say, this kid, the 24-year-old, he's doing it. He's going to bring boxing back to Detroit. I mean, the sense of anticipation for that knockout to be called was just something to behold. I think audiences are really going to enjoy having that flashback and being reconnected to where the Kronk Gym began.
You know, Joe, it's a great memory. And as you and I both know, Kronk is filled with so many of those great memories. And that's one of the things I'm looking forward to and working with you so far as well on this project, is that we're going to be able to capture so many of those amazing memories, bring them back to life, retell the stories in a light that they have not been told previously. Like I said, you know, the story of Hearns Hagler has been documented very well through history. But do you know the backstories? Do you know the stories behind the stories? Well, we're going to take you there. We're going to have the people that were a part of those stories that are still with us, you know, thank God, to share their insight on what was taking place. And that goes from in the gym to some of the biggest promotions in the sport's history, some of the more controversial topics, some of the topics, again, that we as Detroiters remember growing up during those tough years in the 80s. And we're looking to take you places in this documentary that the Kronk story has never been told before.
Yeah, I find it amazing when you look through kind of the pantheon of boxing legends that Emanuel Steward has not had 3 documentaries done about him, let alone ours being this first project. 41 world champions from 14 different countries.
Yeah.
Not just that he was considered the fixer, the guy who you called, I'm trying not to use hired gun.
No, that's all right. We got to use it.
But the guy who you called when you wanted to rejuvenate your career and get yourself back on track was Emanuel Steward. And he brought so many champions from so many places around the world together under the Kronk banner. It is an honor to be putting that story into a framework. And it had its struggles. You mentioned a few of them. Even the Tommy Hearns story. Tommy Hearns involved in one of the greatest, at the time, from a dollar figure standpoint, the Hearns-Leonard fight, part 1.
Absolutely.
That was biggest dollars ever up for grabs in a purse for a fight. And at the same time, whenever there's money, and big celebrity promotions, the gangsters are not far behind.
Well, you know, that's a part of our history that I don't shy away from, and I don't think any of us as Metro Detroiters shy away from. It's part of our culture. It's part of how we grew up in the city, and those relationships also will have a light shed on them that I think you will see more of the Robin Hood side, if you will, of a lot of these figures and what may be the public perception, and no denying some of the things that these individuals may have taken part in or may not have, but we can tell the story of what they meant to us as kids, where, you know, the public perception is, oh, this guy's got the Rolls Royce, you know, I want to be like him, I don't want to go to school. Where in fact, a lot of these guys that were, we'll say, affiliated or associated with Kronk at arm's length, part of entourages, et cetera, encouraged the kids to stay in school. It was quite the opposite. It wasn't like, no, you're not going to come out here. No, did you go to school this week? Okay, you know, and kids would get money, or they would go to amateur fights, and these guys would be betting ringside thousands of dollars on little amateur kids. But the kids got money because they performed in the ring and they stayed in the gym. They didn't get paid to stay in the streets. So we had a really strong, I would say, foundation from even some of the people that publicly will probably, I think some of the viewers will be like, what is this story? Where is this story going?
Yeah.
There's depths.
The neighborhood breakdown in Detroit, in many cases, whether, you know, we can't shy away from it, the gangs had turf. And you had West Side gangs. You had in the southwest corner of Detroit where Kronk Gym was located. Mark Street up in the north that became famous because of the fighters. There was North End, Highland Park gangs that had control of that area. Where Tommy was from on the east side, you had the Chambers brothers, not related to Theo Chambers or Daryl Chambers, but the Chambers Brothers gang. You had, a number of gangs that morphed into what are now Bloods and Crips and the more traditional gangs that you hear about. But you can't avoid a reality, especially in the 1980s when the crack cocaine epidemic was running wild. And just the fact that Emanuel Steward stayed the course. He didn't go running to Los Angeles and move the ship there. He stayed the course. He fought for the neighborhood. He fought for the kids. He preserved as much as he could of the integrity without letting it infiltrate, but it was always going to circulate. You can't stop that.
No, Joe, and that's a great point. And, just from what I saw as a kid coming up, and I think to summarize it the best I can, at least in this setting, before we elaborate more on the documentary, was that it was a place where Emanuel was able to bring the most powerful politicians in Coleman Young, the city council, even far beyond at a national level, as high as even being invited to the White House at one point by President Reagan. But you had Emanuel that was able to bring the politicians, the police officers, not just from the beat cop, but to the chief of police, the people that were running the precincts, the judges.
John McCain, he was very close with John
very
McCain.
Close. And then you had the people that ran the streets, so to speak, the shot callers, if you will. And Kronk was a place where everyone came together. They realized it was neutral ground. We're here for what's best for the kids and to make sure these kids got a shot at getting out of here and doing something with their lives. And we're going to get behind and support. And it's a hands-off, type of environment. Right. We're here to support the kids. And then, of course, as they grow into world champions, as you touched on, money gets involved and there are other things that come along with, I don't want to say they can poison the well, but amateur boxing is something that's very pure. And Emanuel believed in that. And he did his best over the years, if you'll follow the history line, if you will, of trying to keep that same core value into the professional ranks. And that's something very difficult to do when you're talking about it, 10 years old, Tommy and Milton and these guys are fighting for trophies, and 10 years later, they're fighting for millions of dollars. So Emanuel, I think, did a great job, though, to his credit, in the business of boxing to keep those scales balanced.
Yeah, and it's so difficult. I mean, you mentioned these are kids, right? You're a teenager. And imagine the guy who helped you, who got you shoes, who got you bus fare, right? Now comes to you when you're fighting for millions of dollars and says, hey, can I get ringside seats? Can I be part of the entourage? Of course you're going to try. This is somebody who did something, who did a solid for you when you needed it, when you had nothing. To be any different would be dishonorable, and especially when it comes to the code of the street.
Joe, that's a great point. And it's something that I've had some discussions about recently that relate to keeping Kronk very true to its roots and involving as many original Kronk people as possible. We all have our own, I guess you could say, interpretation of our time spent and lessons learned. But to speak of a code, there's something I think that exists in all of us that came through Kronk, regardless of where our life paths may have took us and we went our separate ways, and some people are closer to Kronk than others. But I think we all still share that common bond where, as we talked about, walking through that red door, or even if it was just someone that Emanuel Steward knew through his personal relationships, we have a big extended family out there. And I think that's one of the things that I'm most excited about, is trying to bring as many of those family members back together under that roof again, knowing that we're going to have differences of opinion, where everyone's going to say, well, Emanuel would have did it this way. No, he would have did it this way. We can never have another Emanuel Steward. Let's just be clear. He was one of a kind, and we were blessed. For those of us who knew him, we were blessed. He truly touched everyone. And knowing that you can't replace this dynamic figure who touched the lives of thousands of people all over the world, what again I would like to do is bring back those people that were there, that truly still care about carrying on Emanuel's legacy and doing right by the kids in the city of Detroit and Metro Detroit for that matter, and making sure that Kronk is not just looked at as, this is a place where a fighter can come and make millions of dollars. Yes, okay, that is a goal. It is a goal to develop world champion fighters who can provide for their families for generations to come. But it's also a place to get kids off the street and give them the life skills and teach them things like discipline and the values that you would learn, say, from the martial arts code, and make sure that these kids got a fighting chance outside of the ring.
That's right. If you make sacrifices and you put in the work, the results come in championships, wins, or just being in great shape. Let's face it, this is a sport for warriors who put their bodies in tremendous condition.
You touched on a good one because right now we've sat down with Third Chambers before, who's going to hopefully be a very, very close and solid part of our training program. He's busy with Jake Paul. They opened up camp down in Puerto Rico. Unfortunately, the Canelo fight fell through. But to Jake's credit, he wanted that fight. And so Hunter Lee's down there, the fighter you were referring to, who we just signed, our first official signing for Kronk. He's a multi-time national champion from Canada, 154 pounds, Sicilian, just an all-around dream to manage. I mean, he can fight. He's got over 100 wins as an amateur, solid, $1 million smile. He's got the charisma. He couldn't ask for a better kid to come out the door and represent the brand. And so he's down with Third training in Puerto Rico right now, and he called me the other day, and he said, I had a workout today, man. Third put me through it. So I talked to Third that night, and he told me, he said, John, I made him. He took too long going to the water fountain, and I said, drop and give me 20. And Hunter couldn't even knock out the 20 push-ups in a row. He was so exhausted by that point.
I could hear Third with that little cackle.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Third was on him the other day, he said. So fast forward, he's been down there about a week now. They stopped off in Miami yesterday. Jake had a Super Bowl party. But Hunter's been getting worked over. So right now it's just him and Jake in camp with Third, Coach Larry Wade, strength and conditioning coach, and Jay Leon, who's the assistant trainer, Jay Leon Love, who's also a graduate of McGraw, the original Kronk Gym.
That's right.
Hunter's down there getting in shape, and we've got some big plans for him. I know Jake has expressed interest in him possibly joining the Most Valuable Promotions team, which would be something we would definitely be excited to look at. We've got, I think, 2 fights we're looking at. I got to talk to Third tonight about the scheduling coming up.
Very nice. So putting that into the framework, you've got great ambassadorship from Hilmer Kenty, the class act, if you ask me, in the history of the Kronk Gym. Not just the first champion, but did it the right way, closed out his career honorably, didn't try to extend things far into the many people, sadly, in the fight game end up embarrassing themselves at the end of their career with just tough decisions about finances. Yeah. And Hilmer never did that. He was honorable to the very end, makes him the perfect ambassador. Now you make a great signing in your first fighter with Hunter Lee, as you said, all the earmarks of a class act and a long-time professional, we hope, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, you and Paul are going to bide your time on the announcement of the real property setting that is coming down the line for Kronk Gym in the city of Detroit. And you got Escott with the nonprofit and the first family of boxing with Marie and Sylvia. I mean, all the pieces, if I'm looking at it as the puzzle maker, right, are coming together for the Kronk Gym. So what do you think that final accent is? What do you think the last piece of the puzzle that really puts this thing on the tracks and gets it rolling downhill?
That's a great question. And I don't think, Joe, you could do that question justice by just any one particular lane, if you will, of answer. I'll say this. I think that, number one, it starts with a gym back in the city. And I think people are going to be very excited about the storyline that comes along with this historic location, this iconic location that we will be at, God willing, here, be able to announce in the next few days. It's been a long work. It's worked out for the right reasons, which we'll share soon. So I think the gym, of course, is number one. You've got to have a home base in the city of Detroit, as we often refer to as Detroit's 5th franchise. That's our plan, is to bring that back. We want to bring our share of excitement back to the city of Detroit. Again, give kids an opportunity to get off the block, travel the state, travel the region, travel the globe for that matter, and give these kids life-changing experiences through our amateur program. And along the way, hopefully, develop that next round of Olympic medal winners that Kronk was known for and Emmanuel produced. And then from there, we look to, develop some world-class professional athletes to bring the television cameras, if you will, the streaming services back to Detroit and shine a light not just on Kronk and on our champions, but using those champions to bring a light to shine back on our city. This is a championship city of Detroit. And I've always said, no matter if you live north of 8 Mile, south of 8 Mile, east, west, when you're out of town somewhere and people say, where are you from? The average guy, like we're in Brighton, Michigan, for example. The average person's not going to say, I'm from Brighton, Michigan. Well, where's that? Most people will say, I'm from Detroit. Well, where are you from? Oh, well, I'm from a suburb outside. Myself being born and raised, on the west side, 3234 Livernois to be exact, Michigan Avenue. But
get that credibility stamp.
You got to get it in there. But I love where I'm from, and I love the lessons that I learned as a kid growing up in Detroit. And it's something that I've taken with me no matter where I've traveled in the globe. You're always going to run into somebody from Detroit.
And people forget that, right? They forget that Emmanuel was incredibly well known in Hamburg, Germany. He was incredibly well known in London, in Belfast, where there are still remnants of his fighters, of gyms. He went to Austria for camp with fighters. He had the greatest Australian fighter in the history of that little continent. You go right down the line from Welcome and Sita in South Africa to Ole Kometsen in Scandinavia. I mean, you can go across the globe, and Emmanuel Steward trained them, and then in many cases has now handed off those responsibilities in memoriam through the legion of proteges that are still out there training fighters.
That's a great point. I was speaking on earlier is having that open door policy where, again, a lot of the guys, when Emmanuel passed, went off on their own and have carved out really successful careers as trainers, independent, and to their credit. And I think that, what I would love to see is have those guys come home whenever they're available, have access to the gym, work together to support each other. Even though, again, Andy Lee, he's riding a wave. He's doing a great job. I just sent him a new gym bag, and his heavyweight WBO champion, Joseph Parker, sent him some shirts, and they represent the brand. But it's support like that for your fellow Kronk brother, your Kronk sister, that I believe in, that I would love to see so many of us come back together and support each other. Because no matter where you go, no matter how you look at it, we're still all related in a sense. Emmanuel still was a father figure to us all. So the way I see it, instead of having crabs in a basket mentality, support your fellow Kronk brother and sister. Yeah. And for us, that means having the door open, and then in some cases having some of those people like Third, Jonathan, Hilmer, Milton, Jimmy, so many others, which we'll get into, Octavio, Angel, a lot of guys that I want to have come back and be a part of the gym itself. Because one thing I do want to make clear is this will be a gym that's true to Kronk's roots.
Amen. The story also extends, because you have made mention of this and helped me put a better focus on this, that Emmanuel wasn't just a trainer, he was an excellent manager. He's Hall of Fame in both of those professional pursuits. So when you look at the promotional side of things, since we last talked, obviously Jake Paul defeated Mike Tyson in that bout. Most Valuable Promotions is obviously on the rise, and with the Netflix deal and everything that they're doing, has fantastic opportunity to grow here in the future. Fury lost again in his rematch since last time we talked, but I thought it was an excellent fight. I thought he represented himself wonderfully. I could see people who are upset with the decision, right? Because I do think he was more aggressive than Usyk was, but I could see people who say, well, Usyk got in the more accurate shots, the higher number of shots, etc. So I could see that one. Julio Cesar Chavez announced that he's setting up his own promotion. That's another former Kronk fighter who Emmanuel adopted later in his career, but helped him go on a terrific run. When you see the promotional landscape, where do you think the best opportunities are for Kronk?
That's a really good question. Obviously, right now, all of the major money fights are taking place in the Middle East, and it's unrealistic to compare that business model to any other business model that exists in boxing, because they have access to so much money, and they can afford to, let's say, invest in their brand, in promoting their brand, more so than they're looking at a fight to necessarily turn a profit. Where if you're a traditional promoter, you have to look at every single, I guess you could say, piece on the chessboard to figure out how to maximize your profit. So that business model aside, going to traditional boxing, to your point, I love what MVP is doing. They've got a great consistent program where they make tough competitive fights. There's generally not a lot of, oh, that's the A side, they're going to clearly beat the B side. No, they're known for quality fights. They have great production value. I've been to several of their fights, not just the ones that Jake fights on, but they do a great job. They've got a great team, young team. They take advantage of a lot of cutting edge, I think, things that
Technology and
social media, the opportunity to cross promote brands, and they're hitting an audience where I think a lot of the other promoters are missing. And you have to give credit to Jake for attracting all of these new eyeballs and these new followers to the sport, and especially the MVP brand.
Results speak for themselves. The viewership numbers speak for themselves.
Nobody is going to touch that number that he did with Mike, unless it's him.
So where does the Ilitch family factor in this? Obviously, Mike Ilitch has passed. He was a very close friend of Emmanuel's. LCA has been a venue. You've got Pistons fans, obvious connection to boxing. You've got Red Wings fans. I mean, fighting is a part of hockey, right? So it seems like the Ilitch family, Ilitch Sports and Entertainment, and LCA would kind of be a perfect venue for the future of big promotions in Detroit. Am I wrong? I mean, Tom and Alec Gorse were also Kronk boxing fans, the owners of the Pistons.
Mm-hmm. Going back to our early roots, I mean, Mr. Ilitch was a key player in helping the original Kronk fight series come off. Back when it was, I think, Golden Circle, when Bill and Tom first formed one of the first promotional companies. But you had the Little Caesars fights at the Cobo. You had Little Caesars fights downtown in Hart Plaza. Then you had the big fights at the Joe. So the Ilitch family Mr. Ilitch was very much involved. A lot's changed over the years. They have a great company, 313 Presents, that handles a lot of their event booking. I've met with them a couple years ago just to get a feel for what they were looking to do. I would love to work with them, but our position is kind of in the traditional role of Emmanuel. We're focused on training, athlete development, and advisory/managerial services, amongst other services we'll provide for the fighters. But we're not allowed by law through the Muhammad Ali Act to act as a promoter and as a manager. So what made the Kronk boxing program so successful in its early days was you had a house promoter. So when you had Bill, who I had the pleasure of working for both Bill and Emmanuel over the years, you had Emmanuel managed all the fighters.
Bill Kazierski.
Yes. So in the case of, if there's 30 fighters, you didn't have 30 managers, 30 advisors, 30 lawyers, and 30 entourages. You had Emmanuel, at least, that did a great job. God bless him. I don't know how he did it.
Distilling the complexity.
Very well said, sir. But what you had was Bill had a regular series of fights, going back to the Cobo fight. So these guys could be active literally every month or every other month. That's it. And so you're grooming the pro date, the kid from the amateurs that Emmanuel takes into turning pro, developing his pro career into a world championship fight, which we were hosting, as you said, like Hilmer Kenty, a lot of these big events here. So to kind of say all that to answer your question, we will be exploring some conversations coming up with some individuals about possibly forming that same type of working relationship with a promoter to guide our fighters locally, because we do understand that we do have a brand in the Kronk boxing team, and we are looking to feature our guys once we're there. I mean, you got to have a stable first. We're not we're not ready for that conversation to that degree. But we've got a few prospects that we're looking at. But again, I want to keep the focus on amateur team, developing some solid professionals, and then have that relationship there with a local-based promoter, or potentially a promoter that's not based in Michigan, but who will come in and say make a great promotional partner for Kronk.
You're not teasing the old Bob Arum Top Rank relationship.
Well, not Top Rank in particular, but I love Top Rank. I still talk to Brad Jacobs on occasion, Carl Moretti, that's my buddy. So I go way back with those guys. I'm going to stop after I answer this. No, it's not Top Rank. You've got the right idea.
So, John, I can't have a GOATQuest episode without you telling me who the greatest fighters in the history of Detroit are. You got to at least give me your Mount Rushmore.
Mount Rushmore, Detroit. Man, you always do give me a hard one. Well, I'm going to go with Joe Louis, obviously, number one. I mean, you know how I feel about him just for what he did for the sport, for just so much beyond the sport. I would have to say, and we're not going with necessarily born in Detroit, fighters that represented Detroit.
Sure. I think if they wore the banner of Detroit,
okay,
then.
All right, I got to go with Tommy Hearns, number two. I mean, Tommy just brought so much attention to the city of Detroit, gave fans their money's worth every time out, win, lose, or draw. You got to give it to Tommy.
And the reason why I think Tommy should be considered so highly and right there challenging Joe Louis as far as the city of Detroit is because when Joe Louis was fighting Detroit, Detroit was the city of champions. 1935. Yes. I mean, it was the Paris of the Midwest. Detroit had a completely different position in the national consciousness when Joe Louis was here. When Tommy was here, Detroit was the footmat of the country. We were the punchline of the country, and Tommy Hearns helped elevate that status and bring people's eyes back to Detroit for something positive.
He did. He really, as they say, he put the city on his back. And, you know, you had the Detroit Tigers in '84, you know, when the series, I think, was big for the city. But, you know, Tommy going out there and just putting it on the line, mano a mano, you know, you and I know there's nothing like a big world championship fight at that level, the excitement it brings. And he brought a lot to Detroit.
Yeah, and he fought anybody who wanted to fight.
Yes.
Not like today where the gamesmanship of the matchmaking takes precedence. Tommy Hearns, if you wanted to fight Tommy Hearns, he's going to be outside on the front porch.
Yeah, you don't got to go looking for Tommy. You know, going on from there, I mean, there's so many fighters that had great achievements, you know, as far as world championships and records go. I want to step outside and I'll put a name in because it brought a different type of light to the city of Detroit during that same time frame in that '84 era. And that's Stevie McCrory for winning a gold medal.
It's a great one.
A gold medal from a little kid who grew up on Mark Street. And 6 world champions, Olympic medalists, and top-ranked contenders, 6 in total, grew up on one city block.
Yeah, it's
and
amazing.
He brought a gold medal home to Detroit when the Olympics were the Olympics. I mean, when the Olympic trials were on with Howard Cosell on Saturday afternoon. The trials, let alone the Olympic Games. So I'll throw Stevie in there at number 3 for a gold medal.
I'm going to throw Sugar Ray Robinson in there. Although he wasn't raised in Detroit, he was born in Detroit and then fought some of his biggest fights, the LaMotta series in particular.
Detroit was a second home for Ray and for Jake, for that matter. So, yeah, if we're going to include Robinson in that, I guess that's fair play since we're claiming Joe. But, yeah, I would move Ray Robinson. We'll put him in at 4. He's there in no particular order.
I mean, I think Hilmer Kinty being the first Kronk champion is worth a mention.
Milton McCrory was Detroit's first Detroit-born world champion out of the Kronk stable. You had guys like Boom Boom Johnson, James Toney, Michael Moore. I mean,
Michael Moore, 3-time champion. Arguably, I mean, you can look back at this. Guys fought outside of their weight classes. Michael Moore fought outside of his weight class. He's really a light heavy. Yes. And when you look at the pantheon again, if you look at the full spectrum of light heavyweights, you could make a very strong argument that Michael Moore and Foster were maybe the 2 greatest light heavyweights.
I would dare, without question, Michael's in the top 10, and I would push the envelope, you could make an argument on any given night that he belongs in the top 5 without doubt. And I'll say this, to wrap up that list, you'd made mention about Emmanuel's Hall of Fame management. And that's also something to kind of tie it up for us of where we're at with Kronk moving forward, is that we want to make sure our fighters are looked out for. It's not going to be in the quantity, it's going to be in the quality for us. And that's why we're implementing things like investment opportunities in real estate development, something we're calling 401 Kronk, which we're going to set our fighters up with tax advisors, investment strategists, and make sure that they have an opportunity to take part in investments to where, again, when the fight purses stop coming in, you got to have a plan B.
Amen.
And that also, we'll be working on some other things like gym franchising and helping these guys find a career path that they're familiar with, that they can apply their skills they learned in boxing and also have life after boxing.
Emmanuel Stewart would be very proud of that indeed. That was something that that he definitely wanted to preserve and create. So that legacy carrying on is music to my ears. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to end it there. John, thank you very much for joining me. Please tell Paul Bhatti and the rest of the team that I said hello and that GOATQUEST thanks them. This has been a mediocrely researched but expertly produced and presented podcast for you. Please check us out on all the socials. We're on all the platforms. Come back and please go out there and be the GOAT at whatever it is that you're doing today.